Long before the world we know today, the earth was wild and untamed. Thick forests stretched endlessly across valleys, and mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. Rivers carved their way through stone, feeding green plains where giant animals roamed. Mammoths walked the grasslands in herds. Saber-toothed cats stalked in the shadows. Strange birds with wings as wide as sails circled above. Among this raw, ancient beauty lived our ancestors, early humans. They were not many. Only a few scattered tribes survived in this vast world, perhaps only tens of thousands spread across continents. They had no cities, no machines, and no books, but they carried fire. They carried stone tools, and they carried stories in their voices. Life was not easy. Each day was a test of survival. Men and women moved together in small groups, hunting animals and gathering roots, berries, and nuts. They slept in caves or under simple shelters made of wood and hides. Fire was their most treasured possession. It kept away the darkness, protected them from predators, and warmed their children during the freezing nights. The people respected the land deeply. When a hunter brought down a great beast, the tribe used every part. The flesh became food, the hide became clothing, and the bones became tools. Nothing was wasted. The kill was always honored, for they believed the spirit of the animal lived on. Around the fire, elders told stories of sky spirits, of rivers with souls, of the sun that watched over all life. For thousands of years, these tribes lived in balance with nature. They had learned to read the signs of the earth. A bird's flight could warn of coming storms. The smell of the wind told them when herds were near. The taste of a plant revealed whether it would heal or poison. Children grew up learning these lessons not from books, but from the patient eyes and guiding hands of their parents. Yet, even in this harmony, there were whispers of change. The world was never truly stable. Seasons sometimes shifted in strange ways. Some years the rains did not come. Some winters stretched far too long. And sometimes the animals the people depended on would vanish, following new paths across the land. At first, these changes seemed small, just another challenge in the endless struggle of survival. But slowly, signs began to appear, signs that something much greater, something far more dangerous, was approaching. The rivers ran thinner. The berries grew scarcer. Hunters walked for days and returned with nothing but empty hands and hollow faces. Mothers whispered to their children at night, trying to comfort them when their stomachs ached with hunger. Elders gazed into the stars, wondering if the heavens were sending a warning. No one could have known that humanity was standing at the edge of a great cliff. What awaited them was not just another difficult season, not just another dry year. What awaited them was a disaster that would almost erase them from the earth. For soon, 9 out of every 10 humans alive would vanish. Entire tribes would disappear, leaving only footprints in the dust and bones buried beneath the soil. Humanity would face its darkest trial. But in these quiet years before the silence, life still went on. Children still played along the riverbanks, throwing stones into the water. Mothers still braided grass into baskets. Hunters still sharpened their flint blades by firelight. And somewhere deep in their hearts, the people carried a strength they did not yet understand. A strength that would allow a few of them to endure what was coming. Because though the storm was near, the fire of humanity had not yet gone out. And it never would. The earth is never still. It shifts, it breathes. It changes in ways both gentle and violent. 900,000 years ago, those changes began to weigh heavily on the small human tribes that wandered the ancient world. At first, the signs were subtle. A little less rain, a little less food, but soon, what seemed like passing hardship grew into something far more dangerous. The weather turned colder. Each winter seemed to bite harder than the one before. Snow fell earlier and it stayed longer. The winds that swept down from the mountains cut like knives, driving herds of animals to distant places where humans could not easily follow. Rivers froze, and once fertile valleys grew barren. The people tried to adapt, as they always had. Hunters traveled farther, carrying their spears into lands they had never seen before. Gatherers searched longer, digging deep for roots and peeling bark from trees when nothing else could be found. Fires were kept burning day and night, the smoke curling into the dark sky like prayers to unseen spirits. But survival became harder with every season. Some nights, the tribe's fire was surrounded not by laughter, but by silence. Children cried softly from hunger. Elders, who had once told endless stories, now sat quietly, conserving their strength. Disease also crept in. In times of plenty, people were strong and their bodies could fight off sickness. But in times of hunger, even small illnesses became deadly. A cough that lingered, a fever that burned too hot. These could sweep through a camp, taking life after life. Families buried their loved ones in the frozen earth, marking graves with stones before moving on. Predators, too, grew bolder. Hungry lions prowled closer to the fires. Packs of wolves stalked the edges of the camp, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. Hyenas laughed in the distance, waiting for weakness, waiting for the moment when humans slipped and left themselves unguarded. It was not just nature that pressed against humanity. The people themselves began to feel the strain. Tribes that once traded and shared stories grew wary of each other. When food was scarce, strangers were not welcomed, they were feared. Clashes broke out. Spears were raised not only against animals, but against other humans. Sometimes these encounters ended with blood spilled on the snow. The elders warned that the earth itself was angry. Some believed the spirits were punishing them for forgotten mistakes. Others thought the stars were falling out of balance, dragging the world into darkness. Whatever the reason, it was clear. The world was shifting, and the people were caught in its grip. One by one, camps began to disappear. A group would leave in search of food and never return. Smoke from distant fires, once a sign of neighbors, no longer rose on the horizon. Silence grew where once there had been voices. And yet, amid the struggle, humans held on. Around the fire, parents whispered hope to their children, telling them that the sun would rise warm again, that the herds would return, that life would one day grow easier. These words were like a shield against despair, even if no one truly knew when the hardships would end. Still, the truth was harsh. The population shrank. From thousands, it fell to only hundreds. The earth had become a test, and it was a test that most would not survive. But even in this darkness, something remained. The people still made fire. They still carved tools from stone. They still remembered the stories of their ancestors, carrying them in their hearts even as everything else was stripped away. The collapse had begun. Humanity stood at the edge of extinction. Yet, in the small flicker of every fire, in the quiet determination of every survivor, there was a spark that refused to die. For though 9 out of 10 would soon vanish, the few who remained would carry the flame forward. The silence of the earth grew heavier. What had begun as slow change turned into catastrophe. The cold deepened. It was no longer a season, but an age. Snow spread across the land like a white ocean, swallowing valleys and forests. The winds howled endlessly, carrying with them a chill that sank into bone and spirit alike. The great animals, once so plentiful, vanished. Mammoths and bison migrated far to the south. Herds that had once fed entire tribes were gone, leaving empty plains behind. Hunters wandered for weeks, their spears unused, their stomachs hollow. Sometimes they returned to camp with nothing but frost clinging to their hair. Sometimes they did not return at all. Hunger spread like fire through the people. Families scraped bark from trees and boiled it into thin broth. They chewed on roots so bitter they made their mouths ache. Children cried until their voices grew weak, and then they grew quiet. The elders, knowing their strength was fading, often gave their share of food to the young, whispering that the future must live even if they did not. But still it was not enough. Tribes began to vanish. Entire groups disappeared into the snow, leaving behind only footprints that were quickly covered by the storm. Where once there had been thousands of humans across the earth, now there were only a few hundred, perhaps no more than the size of a single village today. 99 out of every 100 lives were gone. The earth itself seemed determined to erase them. Rivers froze solid. Forests thinned and died. Fires sputtered in the endless wind. Night stretched long, and the stars looked cold and distant, as though even the sky had turned away. Some tribes tried to travel, believing they might find better land beyond the horizon. They crossed mountains, wandered into deserts, or followed coastlines. Many perished on the journey. Others reached empty lands where no food grew. The bones of these travelers rested where they fell, slowly buried beneath sand, ice, or stone. Fear grew heavy in the hearts of the survivors. Children asked why the world had changed, but no one had answers. Elders spoke of old myths, of sky spirits who had grown angry, of a great darkness swallowing the land, of trials meant to test the strength of humankind. Whether these were truth or comfort, no one could say. And yet, in the middle of this despair, the flame of survival did not vanish completely. In caves hidden from the storm, small bands huddled together, sharing warmth. They learned to stitch hides more tightly, to build shelters that held back the wind. They discovered new foods, shellfish from the sea, marrow from cracked bones, that helped them endure. Firelight flickered across their faces as they whispered promises to one another, promises that they would endure, promises that their children would see a warmer day. The world outside was harsh, merciless, and nearly empty of human voices. But inside those small caves, inside those fragile circles of fire, the last survivors of humanity held on. It was the darkest hour. And yet, even in this hour, the flame did not go out, because a few survived. And from those few, all of us would one day come. The world had grown quiet. Where once thousands of human voices had echoed across plains and rivers, now only a few remained. The long, cold age had crushed nearly all of them, leaving behind a silence so deep it seemed as if humanity itself had been erased. Yet, in hidden valleys and sheltered caves, in small groups clinging to warmth and firelight, the last survivors endured. From these survivors came rebirth. Slowly, carefully, they adapted to the harsh new world. They learned to make stronger tools, sharpening stone into blades that could cut through thick hides and bones. They discovered new ways to build shelters, binding wood and hides to create walls against the icy wind. They became more skilled hunters, chasing smaller animals when the great herd were gone, setting traps, and fishing rivers when the ice began to melt. The population was so small that a single sickness, a single disaster, could have ended them forever. But they held on. Families formed tight bonds. Tribes that met were no longer enemies, but allies, for survival required cooperation. Every child born was a gift, a spark of hope against the long shadow of extinction. With time, the earth began to change again. The cold that had lasted for ages slowly weakened. Glaciers retreated. Rivers flowed stronger. Grassland spread, and animals returned to the valleys. The world did not return to what it had been before, but it softened enough for humans to grow once more. And grow they did. From a few hundred survivors, humanity began to rise again. Each birth added strength. Each discovery, new tools, new foods, new ways of living, added resilience. The people carried not only their bodies into the future, but also their memories. The stories of the great silence, of hunger and cold, were passed from parent to child. They became myths, legends, warnings. Around the fire, elders spoke of the time when almost all were lost, when the earth tested humanity and only the strongest hearts endured. These memories shaped the future. The survivors became more cautious, more resourceful, more united. They had faced the edge of extinction and stepped back from it. The fire they carried was no longer just warmth. It was a symbol of persistence, of a will that could not be broken. From these few, the entire human story would continue. Every person alive today carries within them the strength of those ancestors. The blood that flows in our veins is the same blood that flowed in theirs, the blood of those who refused to surrender when the world itself seemed determined to erase them. 900,000 years have passed since that great trial. The earth has changed countless times since then. Civilizations have risen and fallen. Cities now stand where once there were only forests. But the memory of that ancient silence remains written in our DNA, a quiet reminder of how close we once came to disappearing forever. And perhaps that is why the story matters. It tells us that even in the darkest times, even when all seems lost, a spark can survive. From a handful of people in the frozen wilderness came billions. From the smallest flame came a fire that would one day light the entire world. The rebirth was slow, but was certain. Humanity had been tested, And though 99% had vanished, the 1% endured, and through them, so do we,